In the first-class cabin of Aurora Skyways flight AS921, a black man walked to his seat, 2B. On the seat back, a handwritten note was stuck out of service. Seat reassignment in progress. A piece of paper, just a few lines, but enough to make the whole cabin silent. The woman sitting next to him, Victoria Harland, a member of a prominent banking family, spoke softly, her voice even and cold. "This seat is broken. Try going down to economy class. No one checks tickets. No one asks why. Just averted eyes, phones silently raised to record. Because in a world of privilege, people always believe they know who belongs here and who doesn't." But just 4 minutes later, the flight and the airline was forced to ground. And the man kicked out of his seat was Damon Cole, CEO of the tech conglomerate that ran the airline's security. This story is not just about a chair, but about how one man chose wisdom over anger, letting justice speak for itself. Don't look away, because in just a few minutes, you will see. One person's silence can change the entire system. If you believe that justice does not need to be heard by shouting, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to join us in this story. Morning at Liberty International Airport. Sunlight slides across the giant glass panels of Gate 18, where Aurora Skyways flight AS921 is boarding. There's something programmatic in the air. Men in dark suits, the smell of espresso, and the confident click of shoes on marble floors. It's not just an airport. It's a ritual of the elite people who believe they were born to sit in the front row of the world. As passengers boarded, Damon Cole almost blended into the scene except for one thing. He was the only black person in first class that day. His ash-gray suit was tailored, without any obvious branding. A German-style antique watch, neat and refined. He carried a slim briefcase, no company logo, just 3 small embossed words, Nova Sentinel. No one noticed when he entered, until they did. His seat was 2B, right in the middle of the first 2 rows, with a direct view of the cockpit, but there was a small piece of paper taped to the backrest, written in black marker, out of service, seat reassignment in progress, a handwritten note, no company logo, no technical code, no signature, just an ordinary piece of paper in what was supposed to be the pinnacle of customer experience. Damon paused. He tilted his head. The ink was still shiny, barely dry. The man in the back row looked up, then looked away, pretending to adjust his watch. The 2 flight attendants chatting at the front of the cabin didn't notice. And then, from seat 2A, a female voice spoke up soft, but loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, "That seat is broken. Go sit somewhere else. Try economy class." The voice had the accent of old New York money, slow, confident, and imbued with a hint of invisible power. It was Victoria Harland, a woman in her 50s, the only daughter of the Harland banking group. A red Valentino dress, Chanel glasses, a platinum ring with a sapphire half the size of a finger. She didn't look at Damon as if he were another passenger, but as if he were someone who had just gotten lost. Damon was silent. He put down his briefcase and looked down at the paper again. His hand touched the seat, smoothing the leather. There was no sign of damage, no warning tape. He looked up and met Victoria's eyes. She smiled politely, the kind of smile one uses when tipping a valet. "I'm just helping," she said. "Are you sure your ticket isn't on coach?" A man in the back row pulled out his phone and turned on the camera. Another young woman pretended not to hear, but glanced at the reflection in the window. No one said anything. No one needed to. Damon nodded slightly, as if verifying something. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just took the paper off the chair, folded it, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, a small but powerful gesture. Then he turned and walked back out the jet bridge. Calm. Not a frown. Not a word of response. The people filming thought he had given up. The others sighed in relief, thinking no big deal. Only Victoria leaned back in her chair, smiling with satisfaction as someone who had just kept order in her world. But they don't know. Every move Damon Cole makes has a reason. And when a man chooses silence over anger, the world should start worrying. At the top of the jet bridge, Damon stopped. He looked out the small window, where the light reflected off the silver wings of Aurora Skyways. His eyes were still, but not empty. He took out his phone and entered a short 4-digit code. No one but 5 people in the world knew what it meant. Nova Sentinel Group. His systems have just received the activation command. A chain of protocols has begun to spread through the Aurora Skyways operating network. Not retaliation. Just fair play in first class. Victoria called the flight attendant. You can tell the technician that I helped a little. I told the passengers to sit somewhere else in seat 2B. She didn't know it, but at that very moment, every screen in the cabin was flashing. The cabin sync system was delayed. A faint error message was heard from the front of the cockpit. And when Chloe Ramirez, the chief flight attendant, came over to check, her eyes widened in confusion. Strange. The system doesn't report any seats as out of service. Victoria still smiled, but in that smile, for the first time, there was a trace of worry that she herself did not understand. When Damon Cole left the cabin, it looked like he was just avoiding trouble. But in reality, he was pulling the trigger on a storm, one that would bring an entire airline to its knees over a handwritten note. The morning at Liberty International continued as if nothing had happened. Light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the polished granite floors. The loudspeakers called out to passengers, mingling with the metallic sounds of trolleys and the footsteps of expensive shoes. The Aurora Skyways first-class lounge didn't feel like a boarding house. It felt like a mini-conference of global finance. People there knew how to judge people by their watches. They could guess someone's net worth from the thinness of their laptop or the brown strap of their briefcase. And in that world, Damon Cole was an outsider. No fuss, no logo, no stereotypical CEO look they were used to. He sat in the corner of the room, back straight, eyes glued to the small screen of his phone. No one noticed that the device was secured by a system he had written himself. A few people passed by, their eyes passing him as if through a void. Here, his unmarked presence was almost a communication error. A few steps away, Victoria Harlan stood at the counter, where champagne was poured from slender, breathtaking glasses. She smiled at the waitress, the smile of someone accustomed to being served. The light reflected off her red dress, making her an exclamation point in the crowd. People recognized her without introduction. The Harlan name was a kind of passport to finance. Her family had funded 3 governors and 2 presidential campaigns. Victoria had the air of someone who believed she belonged in every fashionable place. Every movement had its own rhythm, as if she were born to stand in the middle of waiting rooms like this. She was used to people taking a step back when she passed, and to her, those who didn't simply didn't understand the order of the world. Meanwhile, Damon looked at his watch. 8:42 a.m. He had been in hundreds of lounges like this in Zurich, Tokyo, Dubai, but this morning, here, there was one small difference. He didn't have his assistant with him. He wanted to go alone. He wanted peace before his closed-door meeting with the Aurora Skyways Aviation Technology Board. Ironically, it was his aloneness that made him seem unimportant to those accustomed to viewing the world through a VIP pass. When the gate was opened, Victoria walked in first, as if she were the one in charge of the flight. She chatted with the couple behind her about the European market, her smile beaming. Words like investment fund, financial institution, and class were repeated over and over again in their conversation like the background beat of a song that only their class could hear. Damon stood at the end of the line, phone in hand, not pushing or looking busy. He just watched. The door to flight AS921 opened, and the cold air from the air conditioning vented out like a boundary inside was a world of choice. Victoria walked in, a smile still on her face. She greeted Chloe, the head stewardess, with a familiar voice, the kind of voice that knew the entire crew by name and no one would dare forget her. "Good morning. Chloe, is my usual champagne available today?" "Of course, Miss Harland," Chloe replied, her smile so professional that no one could tell she was tired. Victoria put her bag down on seat 2A, adjusting her scarf. Next to her was seat 2B, empty. Her eyes stopped on the seat, then glanced around a slight flash of irritation. No one else noticed, but in a few seconds she pulled a small, folded piece of paper from her purse. The handwriting was thin and slightly slanted, out of service, seat reassignment in progress. She pasted the paper to the head of chair 2B, her eyes calm as someone setting the table, and when Damon stepped up, the paper became an invisible boundary between two worlds, one of inherited privilege, the other of self-built power. She looked at Damon for the first time. In that moment, she might not have seen a businessman, just a dark-skinned man, alone, with no company badge, no bodyguard, no first-class acquaintance. She spoke softly, in the most polite tone. "That seat is broken. Go sit somewhere else. Try economy class. Not malicious. Just a habit of an acquaintance above." Damon looked at her, his eyes non-judgmental. He'd seen those eyes before at European tech conferences, in boardrooms of old corporations, even at fundraising galas. They were the eyes of people whose standing had never been questioned. And perhaps, he thought, that was also why they easily forgot the world was not born to be trusted. It happened slowly, only a few seconds, but it was enough to reflect everything that was rotten in the system. Victoria didn't look at his boarding pass, didn't call the staff to confirm. She didn't need proof. In her world, a look was proof. As Damon turned to leave the cabin, Victoria adjusted her skirt. Satisfied, to her, it was just an act of order. She didn't know that. Outside, Damon had sent a signal, a command that was enough to make the numbers on the airline's mainframe stop. In the waiting room, the sunlight slowly drifted west. The loudspeaker blared again, calling another flight. Everything was business as usual. But somewhere on the control network, a command was activated as silent as the person given the command, and that's when that luxurious world began to crack. Before Damon Cole boarded the train, Victoria Harland had seen him in the few minutes in the waiting room, not because she wanted him to, but because he stood out in a way she wasn't used to. A black man, alone, without a secretary, without a company name tag, without the Manhattan corporate aura in her world. That meant not belonging here. She had her eye on him from the moment he picked up his ticket from the priority gate. Not fast, not slow, just a calm walk. To Victoria, that calm was the sign of a man who doesn't know his place. She sat in seat 2A, put her bag aside, and glanced around the first-class cabin, familiar faces of tycoons, a few tech investors, a hedge fund manager, all within her safe zone, people who knew how to behave in this glittering world. Only seat 2B next to her was empty. She didn't like the emptiness. In first class. Who sits next to whom wasn't just a matter of sitting, it was a matter of status. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, prepared in advance. She wrote it in black felt-tip pen, the slant deliberately sloppy, the handwriting of a technician in a hurry. A few simple lines, out of service, seat reassignment in progress. She'd been thinking about it since she'd seen Damon at the check-in gate. A fleeting thought, then it grew into action. Not malicious, she told herself. Just order. If someone saw the note, they'd think, oh, this seat's broken. No one would ask, because in Victoria's world, her voice and smile were proof. When Damon boarded the cabin, the note was there, taped neatly to seat 2B. The morning light streamed in through the window, reflecting off the seats, highlighting the black letters against the white background. She leaned in, pretending to look out, but really watching her reflection in the cabin glass. Damon stopped in front of her chair. She saw his eyes skim the paper, lingering for a full 2 seconds, not bewildered, not confused, just looking. Victoria's heart skipped a beat at that moment, not because she was afraid of being discovered, but because she suddenly felt seen. Then he looked up, his eyes meeting hers. No words, no accusations. She smiled, polite as ever. That seat is broken. Go sit somewhere else. Try economy class. The words came out smoothly, as light as a breath. She didn't realize she had spoken with the tone of someone who believed it was perfectly reasonable. He didn't react. He didn't ask. Didn't prove it. Didn't say, I have a ticket here. He just took off the paper, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket, and left. The cabin was dead silent. The others looked, but no one intervened. Because this was first class where silence was a kind of complicity. Victoria leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath. Everything seemed to be going the way she wanted it to. A piece of paper, a small action. She felt order restored. But then, a small beep sounded from the seat monitor in front of her. The system paused. A message appeared, system rebooting. Please wait. She frowned. A technical glitch that rarely happened in first class. Chief Stewardess Chloe Ramirez hurried over to check. Miss Harland, sorry for the inconvenience. It's probably just a system update. Just a few minutes. It's okay. I understand, Victoria said, her voice still gentle. She picked up the glass of water and turned it gently in her hand. But the feeling of confidence from earlier had faded a bit. Sometimes the smallest things carry more weight than we realize. Outside, on the jet bridge. Damon Cole stood still, phone in hand. The light from the screen reflected off his face calm, not angry, not bitter. He typed only a short string of commands, his deep voice echoing over the secure line, tag Aurora Skyways flight AS921. Activate Protocol Obsidian. On the other end of the line, a female voice replied, confirmed. Mr. Cole? No one in the cabin knew that. In a few minutes, the entire airline system would begin to vibrate in silence, not because Damon wanted revenge, he just wanted the world to see itself. As for Victoria, she leaned her head back, smiling slightly, unaware that the storm had begun and the eye of the storm was the paper she had written on. Damon Cole was still standing there, where the last light of the jet bridge fell on the cold steel. He looked at the piece of paper in his hand, the back of it still stained with wet ink. Black, felt-tip pen, thin lines, slight slant to the right, not the technician's handwriting. He knew it. He'd seen papers like these all his life, subtle ways of telling someone they didn't belong. The first time was when he was fresh out of college, applying to a big tech company. The HR manager had put his application in a separate pile and said, "We'll contact you if there's a fit." They never did. But 5 years later, that same company was using his security software. Now, in front of him, the only difference was that this time the paper was posted in public, on his seat, in first class, amidst the gazes of people who believed they were seeing a small mistake. He glanced over at Victoria Harland. She maintained the calm demeanor of someone who had everything under control. A polite smile, shoulders slightly back, a perfectly practiced leg crossing. Only her eyes, despite her attempts to avoid them, were following him over the edge of her glasses. Damon said nothing. He didn't need to. They say the silence of a man who knows who he is can change the atmosphere of a room. In first class that day, the atmosphere gradually thickened. A few passengers glanced. One pulled out a phone. Another whistled softly, pretending not to see. Damon touched the back of chair 2B. The leather was cold and soft, without a tear. He stroked it gently, then folded the paper and stuffed it into his jacket pocket. No expression, no smile, no frown, just a slight nod, as if confirming something. He turned and walked out, neither fast nor slow, just enough for everyone in the compartment to see him leave. A man whispered to his companion. "He must have gotten the wrong ticket." Another woman replied in a low voice, "No, I think the other woman said something." They didn't dare speak any louder. In this space, people were afraid of things that weren't written in the rules. Victoria took a sip of water. She felt victorious. She thought he'd left in embarrassment. She was sure that would be the end of it. A small story, forgotten before takeoff. But Damon didn't leave the airport. He just stepped out of their sight to act where no one could see. In the jet bridge, the air was cold, and the smell of fuel mixed with the smell of new plastic. Damon stood still, opening his phone. The screen displayed a dark interface no one outside of Nova Sentinel Group had ever seen. He typed in a 4-character code, OBSD. The screen changes state, displaying the text Protocol Obsidian, awaiting authentication. He pressed his finger against the sensor, then spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "Cole, Damon Cole, tag Aurora Skyways flight AS921, escalate to Tier 5. From the other end of the line, a familiar female voice rang out deep, clear, confirmed, activating under vendor rights. Only a few people in the world know that Protocol Obsidian is an internal tool of Nova Sentinel Group, a global security monitoring system deeply integrated into the operating software of many airlines, including Aurora Skyways. No one in the cabin knew that. With a few simple steps, Damon had just transferred control of the system from the company to himself. No sabotage, no intrusion, just turning back what was his. He put his phone in his pocket and took a deep breath. A young flight attendant walked by and noticed him. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need any assistance?" "No, thank you," Damon said, his voice soft as a breath. He looked back through the glass, where Flight AS921 was filling up. The light in the cabin reflected off Victoria's blonde hair. She was still smiling, saying something to the passenger next to her. If she had known that just one signal from him would send the entire Aurora Skyways system into internal check mode, she probably wouldn't have laughed like that. But Damon didn't do anything to punish her. He didn't need to. For him, justice didn't come by teaching her a lesson, but by letting the truth reveal itself layer by layer, silently. He turned away, walking toward the large glass doors that overlooked the runway. Other planes were taxiing, reflecting the morning light on the dew-dampened pavement. The world continued as if nothing had happened. But he knew in a few minutes the Aurora Skyways would start to feel out of sync. Back in the cabin, Chloe Ramirez, the chief flight attendant, noticed something strange. The cabin system synced unusually slowly. The flight display froze for a few seconds. She checked the control panel, tried to reboot, but it didn't work. A small error message appeared under Seat 2B. Manual override detected. She frowned slightly. Strange. Victoria Harland, still sipping her mineral water, occasionally glanced toward the cabin door where Damon had disappeared. She told herself that she was just protecting my flying experience. Little did she know that her confidence was beginning to shake the system she thought belonged to her. Some passengers in the cabin began to ask, "Why isn't it closed yet? Is there a problem?" Chloe tried to reassure him. "It'll only be a few minutes, sir." Those few minutes were enough time for Damon Cole's silent storm to form. No one heard a sound. No warning sounded. Just a series of small technical signals, one after another from the plane, to the gate, to Aurora Skyways Operations Center. As for Damon, he sat back in the row of seats near the window, his hands clasped together. No one knew what he had just done. But there was a strange calmness in that look, the calmness of someone who knew that justice was being enacted. The jet bridge was deserted. The only sound was the hum of the air ducts and the lone footsteps of a technician pushing a tool cart away. Damon stood there in the gray area between first class and the outside world where no one paid attention. The white light reflected off the dull steel, illuminating his face. Calm. Cold. Not angry, not bitter. Just a man at work. He took his phone from his jacket pocket. The black screen switched to secure mode, a series of symbols scrolling across it. In the top corner, a triangular icon appeared. Nova Sentinel Secure Channel. He said briefly, his voice low and clear obsidian line. Damon Cole confirmed. Tag Aurora Skyways Flight AS921 for escalation. Activate Protocol Obsidian Full Observation Mode. Get all logs, manifest, crew comm, and cabin data stream. A female voice replied. Soft but precise as a machine identity confirmed Damon Cole. Level 1 access now open. Data logging started. Obsidian mode online. He stared out the small window overlooking the runway. Another 737 had just taxied. The sunlight reflected off the fuselage so brightly it seemed transparent. To anyone else, it would have been just another morning. But to Damon, it was a moment when he let his system speak for him. He tapped the screen, calling up the airline's intranet map. Little dots of light began to flicker. Gate 18, crew tablet, cockpit log, cabin server, passenger manifest. All connected to the Nova Sentinel Group hub in Arlington. An invisible tether had been stretched between him and the entire Aurora Skyways airline. No one but him and 4 others in the world had access to that protocol. It was the final layer of airline security, installed to prevent digital terrorism. But now, the man who designed it was using it for something else, exposing the truth. A security message appears, Elena Brooks' signal received, Obsidian activated. Do you want level 2 escalation? Damon typed back, no. Keep watch. No disruption. Just take whatever they think no one is looking. He put the phone in his pocket, his other hand still clutching the out-of-service note. The ink was dry. It was a small piece of paper, but it said enough about how the world worked. People who believed they had the right to determine who sat where. He looked out into the cabin, through the thick glass. Victoria Harland was still sitting there. She was leaning back in her seat, talking to the passenger next to her, a relaxed expression on her face, completely unaware that every word, every data in the cabin was being backed up and sent to Nova Sentinel's security center. A technician walking across the jet bridge saw Damon and bowed slightly. Damon just nodded, then turned back to his phone screen, where a new window had just popped up. Obsidian log. Cabin sync delay detected. Manual override detected. Seat 2B. Crew internal comms logging started. Each line is a heartbeat of the system. A heartbeat that is slowing down because the person who created it is in control. A breeze from the inlet stirred the hem of his shirt. Damon closed his eyes, not to calm himself, but to hold back the emotion he didn't want anyone to see, exhaustion. Not for the first time, and probably not the last. Each time, he chose the same thing, silence, no confrontation, no justification, just letting his system, what he had created with intelligence and discipline, do the talking for him. A ding sound came from the phone. New message from Elena Crewcom started recording. It looked like the cabin was reporting an error. Anders Lee was notified. Damon typed back, continue. Observe only. Do not interfere. He put down the phone, took a step toward the glass door, and looked out at the silver wings of the plane. Under the light, the Aurora Skyways logo seemed to fade. He spoke softly, as if to himself. No need to be angry. They will see for themselves. Inside, Chloe Ramirez was checking the control panel for the 3rd time. The cabin systems suddenly slowed down. The sync screen froze, and the audio from the intercom had a strange delay. It seems like there's a delay in the internal transmission. She whispered to Anders Lee, the flight's purser. Maybe a software update. Anders replied, but his voice was uncertain. Chloe looked toward the front row. She saw Victoria Harland laughing, and the passenger who had been ejected, the black man, was gone. A strange premonition flashed through me. In the Nova Sentinel Group Operations Center, a series of screens lit up. In the center of the circular room, Elena Brooks, the system operations manager, stood in front of the main control panel. On the screen, Flight AS921 was outlined in a bright red. Full view mode had been activated. Elena adjusted her headphones, her voice, even cabin monitoring, data transmission stable, no intervention, just observation, ping Damon every 30 seconds. She paused, her eyes softening as she saw his name appear on the status board. She knew. He only turned on Obsidian when things were out of control, and he never did it for personal gain. Signals from the flight cabin audio, engineering log, passenger data stream. All was quiet, except for one small sound that rang clearly in the recording. This seat is broken. Try going down to economy class. Elena looked up at the screen. She sighed and whispered, "They did it again." Damon, outside the jet bridge. Damon put down his phone and walked slowly out of the lot, leaving only the hum of the air conditioner behind him. No one saw his smile. No one saw his eyes. Only one thing was certain. Aurora Skyways' systems had just switched to a mode no one there could control. The Storm Protocol Obsidian had officially been activated, and like every storm he had ever created, it began with silence. In the first-class cabin of Aurora Skyways flight AS921, the atmosphere still seemed peaceful. A flight attendant had just closed the luggage compartment. A light, neat metallic clank. Passengers were still chatting, their whispers mixed with the soft music coming from the cabin speaker system. Then, the entertainment screen in the first row suddenly went black. A passenger touched it. No response. Gray text appeared on a black background, system maintenance. Please wait. 1, 2, then 3 other screens also gave errors. The man in seat 3A frowned, trying to press repeatedly. The woman behind him asked, "Ma'am, why won't my screen boot up Chloe Ramirez?" The chief flight attendant approached, her smile professional but her eyes slightly worried. "I'll check right away, sir." She opened the cabin sync device, but the system was slower than usual to log in. The screen cycled through the loading icon for 10 seconds, then froze. Chloe shook her head, trying to restart. It didn't work. Up front, Anders Lee, the flight's purser, was talking to the cockpit via intercom. His voice dropped as he heard the report cabin sync delay, a rare occurrence especially on a newly maintained plane like this one. Chloe approached and lowered her voice. "Anders, do you notice anything strange? All the screens are down in first class, but the rear cabin is still working normally." "I know," Anders replied, looking straight at the control panel. "And coincidentally, a few minutes ago a passenger was invited to leave seat 2B. Chloe paused. "You mean the black man?" "Yeah." "Has anyone confirmed the seat failure?" "No. There was no report. There was no seat out of service in the engineering log." They looked at each other, silent for a second. It was no coincidence. As they spoke, whispers began to spread throughout the cabin. "Why isn't it closed yet? I have a meeting in San Francisco at noon." "What kind of system is this that fails at such a time?" Chloe tried to keep a smile, walking over to reassure each person. "Please be patient for a few minutes. The crew is processing." She turned back to row 2A, where Victoria Harland was sitting, her face still calm, her legs crossed, a slight smile. "Miss Harland, I apologize for the inconvenience. We'll reboot the system shortly." "It's okay, Miss Ramirez," Victoria replied, her voice soft but sharp. "I was just letting you know to avoid confusion." He didn't seem to know the chair was broken, so I helped. The voice, soft, almost innocent, made Chloe hesitate. "Help." The words echoed in her head, colliding with the scene before her black screen. Upset passengers, widespread technical failure. She didn't know why, but in that moment it felt like the world around them was reacting. Anders approached and whispered, "I just got the log." Cabin sync failed from the airline's main network, not from the plane, like someone was controlling it from the outside. "You think it was a hack?" Chloe asked. "Not really. Like it was monitored, authorized by the vendor." They looked at each other, remembering the name they had just heard during boarding, Damon Cole. The man was kicked out of his chair, without a word of response. silent. But his eyes at that moment seemed to be remembering every detail. Anders said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "If he's someone with access to the system, then we're in for our own lesson." Chloe finished. Behind, the passengers' voices began to grow louder. "Miss, why didn't you take off? I paid to fly on time. The screen is still broken. Is anyone doing anything?" She took a deep breath, then turned back, giving a small smile. "We are processing it. Please understand." But when she bent down to check her handheld device again, a new line appeared. "Access denied. Cabin monitoring. External override." She froze. Outside of the company's control, there was only one entity that could have created that command, Nova Sentinel Group, inside the jet bridge. Damon Cole remained seated in the waiting area, his phone resting on his knee. The screen displayed cabin data video feeds, system status, and the audio recording being uploaded to the server. He did nothing more, just watched. On the small screen, he saw Victoria Harland, still sitting in the seat 2A, her smile unchanged. He heard her voice through the mic booth. "I just want to help. No one wants to sit next to someone who is not from the same class. You know." He paused the video. His gaze remained calm, but his hands clenched lightly in his lap. Not with anger, just the sadness of someone who had grown accustomed to seeing the system make the same mistake over and over again. He sent a short message to the Nova Sentinel Center log cabin, back up all crewcom data, no disruption, just evidence. On the other side, Elena Brooks responded immediately. "Understood. Aurora Skyways will not fly until we give the go-ahead." In the hold, Anders received a signal from the cockpit. "We've been asked to delay our departure. The airline says we need to check the system." He looked at Chloe, and they both understood. It wasn't that the system was down. It was being checked by the very person they had just hurt. As for Victoria, she began to realize that people around her were looking at her more often. She tried to smile, took a towel to wipe her hands, and said softly, "This is probably just a coincidence." But her voice trembled slightly, and her hand clenched the glass of water. On the Nova Sentinel control panel, a series of lights turned yellow. The following text appeared: AS921, Cabin Control Limited, pending authorization from Nova Sentinel. Elena looked at the screen and sighed softly. She just messed with the only person who has the power to shut down this entire airline. As for Damon, he stood up, put his phone in his pocket, his eyes not cold, just calm. He didn't need to prove anything. He was just letting Protocol Obsidian do what it was made to do. Light up the dark corners that people deliberately ignored. In the first-class cabin of Aurora Skyways flight, AS921, the atmosphere began to change. It was no longer the usual luxury, but a thick silence, mixed with the smell of metal and suspicion. A passenger in row 3A leaned towards his companion, his voice low but still loud enough for a few people to hear. "See that paper? Doesn't look like company paper at all." The person beside him raised his eyebrows and looked towards seat 2B, where the paper had once been. Now, only the faded glue and the crease marks remained on the seat's leather. Another person, row 4C, smacked his lips. "I've flown this airline for 10 years and I've never seen a handwritten note like that. Someone must have put it up." The whispers continued, spreading like ripples. At first, they were just whispers, but within minutes, all eyes in the cabin were on the same spot, row 2A, where Victoria Harland sat. She could feel it, though no one said anything outright. The looks weren't outright hostile, just longer than necessary. A fleeting glance, then a pause long enough to create a sense of unease. Victoria pursed her lips. She picked up the phone, pretending to read an email. Her hands shook slightly. Chloe Ramirez walked by, cabin tablet in hand. A passenger stopped her. "Let me ask you, is that seat 2B marked as damaged by the company?" Chloe paused, her lips opened, then closed. "I cannot confirm that, sir." The other man frowned. "What do you mean? Can't confirm, I'm just asking." "It means we're checking again," Chloe replied, her voice small but firm. She walked quickly to Anders Lee, the flight's purser. "Anders, they're starting to ask questions. What should I say?" He looked straight at her, his voice low. "No confirmation. Don't say the seat is broken or who fixed it. Let me work on the cockpit." Anders walked toward the front of the compartment, speaking briefly into the radio. His voice was low and even, but his hand tightened on the clipboard. He knew something bigger was going on. Not a technical problem, but a moral one, and it was coming to light in a way no one expected. Behind her, Chloe stood, her eyes scanning the cabin. Faces that had been relaxed began to tense. A few people turned on their phones and returned to the cabin. A woman whispered, "That lady, she must have been the one who placed the note." "Right, I'm not sure," the man replied. But apparently, the flight attendant was hesitant too. Victoria heard her ears burned. She turned to Chloe, her voice urgent. "Miss Ramirez, could you please clarify that I'm just helping? I don't want any misunderstandings." Chloe was slightly confused. The gazes of the dozen or so people in the cabin were all on her. She understood no matter what she said now, it wouldn't save anyone. She just bowed her head slightly. "Miss Harland, I think we'd better let the purser deal with the cockpit." The answer was like a thin blade, cutting through the veil of power Victoria still carried around herself. She sat up straight, trying to keep her composure, but her voice had changed. "I am a frequent first-class passenger on this airline. I know Stephen Mallory, their CEO. I will not accept the way you speak to me." Chloe remained calm. "I understand, ma'am, but I have to follow procedure now." Procedure, a word Victoria once used to control others, now returned, binding her to silence. She looked around. No one was smiling anymore. The man in row 3A put his phone down on the table and looked at her, saying nothing. Another woman shook her head slightly, as if she had just realized something. Inside, the luxury had fallen away. In its place was a cold void where people began to see more clearly who was the victim, who was the initiator. Victoria tried to smile, but it was no longer elegant. It was a trembling thing wrapped in pride. I just wanted to help," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I thought the chair was broken." No one answered. For a moment, she felt as if the entire cabin was looking right through her. At the front of the compartment, Anders returned. His voice was low but clear. "Chloe, please inform the passengers that the airline is checking the system. The cause of the delay has not been determined yet." She nodded and began to make an announcement over the intercom, her voice calm. But when she finished, she caught a glimpse of Victoria looking down, her eyes out the window, her lips pressed together. In the reflection of the mirror, she saw the woman's shoulders tremble slightly, maybe from embarrassment, or because for the first time in her life, she understood what it was like to be alone in a crowd. Damon Cole, on the jet bridge, remained silent. on his phone screen. He saw the cabin through the internal camera, worried faces, shifting eyes, and the woman in the red dress slowly losing control. He didn't gloat, he didn't laugh, he just sighed softly, then turned off the screen. An old thought echoed in his head, like a personal motto. When the truth speaks, we don't need to do anything more. Inside, the atmosphere in the cabin had changed completely. The silence was no longer a symbol of luxury. It was a mirror of suspicion. A first-class cabin, just a few square meters, but at this moment it feels like a microcosm of society where prejudices are exposed, power is shaken, and justice is quietly reshaping order. Nearly 2,000 miles away, in a glass building in Arlington, Virginia, curved screens that nearly touched the ceiling lit up simultaneously. Streams of green data raced through the room, connecting in a network as alive as a heartbeat. In the center of the room, Elena Brooks stood silently, watching as the Nova Sentinel Group's operations center went into emergency mode. A slight warning pops up incoming protocol Obsidian, source Damon Cole, target Aurora Skyways flight AS921. Elena didn't need to ask anyone. She knew immediately Damon had done it, not to attack, but to monitor. She touched the touchscreen, her voice calm but clear. Confirm, Cole priority, switch system to observation mode, no disruption, no trace, ping Damon every 30 seconds. An electronic voice rang out from the system command acknowledged. A series of readings appeared: Aurora Skyways manifest, crew comm, latency, gate status, and data sync logs. A diagram of the cabin was displayed on the main screen, illuminated dots representing each device in the cabin. Everything was running smoothly except in first class, where the data stream began to slow, flickering as if it were being watched. A young engineer turned to look at Elena, Mrs. Brooks. Should we send a warning to the company? Elena shook her head. No, not to them. Damon would never turn on Obsidian for something so trivial. We'll just watch. She stepped closer to the screen, the light reflecting off her deep brown eyes. There was no technician's curiosity in them, but the understanding of someone who had seen too much. She knew Damon wasn't one to give in to temptation. He'd been left out of negotiations, cut off by a bank manager because he didn't sound like someone in the industry. He'd heard enough we didn't mean it, apologies to know that prejudice sometimes didn't need words, and that's why he created Protocol Obsidian not to get revenge, but to remember, to prove, to force the system to correct itself. Another employee came forward and reported crewcom data is being recorded. There's an audio signal from the first cabin. Can I extract it for you display? Elena said. On the screen, a female voice rang out, clear and calm. I just want to help. He doesn't seem to belong in this compartment. Elena tilted her head slightly, her lips pursed. She didn't care who spoke. That voice, confident, gentle, but with an air of privilege, was one she'd heard too many times in her life. Tag, crew, bias, passenger interaction. Save to log, she ordered. Understood, the engineer replied, typing rapidly on the keyboard. A soft light circle marks the recording being saved to the evidence database. Elena walked to the central console and placed her hand on the touchpad. She zoomed in on the Nova Sentinel's global network airlines, utilities, banks, all connected to it. It was a web of power, but Damon the man sitting on the jet bridge was the only one who could stop it with a single command. She looked at her watch. Year 004 since Obsidian had been activated, and the world still didn't know that an airline was having its every line of data scanned. Another employee looked up. The cabin signal is stable, but the manifest is abnormal. The airline systems are starting to pick up the delay. Keep it, Elena said. Let them figure it out. Don't let anyone know we're here. She looked out the large glass doors. Outside, Arlington was gray and drizzling. In the silence of the control room, Elena could hear the system's own heartbeat steady, cold, emotionless, but she knew that behind it sat a man in the aisle of the plane, choosing wisdom over anger. A small message pops up, ping success Damon Cole, active connection maintained. Elena nodded slightly. Good, he's still under control. An engineer asked quietly, "Madam, if they continue to discriminate against passengers, should we move to level 2? No, Elena replied, "We won't interfere. Obsidian wasn't created to destroy, but to illuminate. When the system sees itself in the mirror, it will stop itself." The room fell silent. No one spoke. There was only the sound of typing on the keyboard and the rain outside, like the background music to a silent symphony. Elena turned back to the cabin monitor. She saw Chloe Ramirez's face, her eyes tense. She saw Anders Lee talking on the radio, and Victoria Harland, the woman with the dark red lips, losing her confidence. She said softly, almost whispering, "This is not revenge. This is the natural response of justice." A technician looked at her and asked softly, "And if they don't notice?" Elena replied, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Obsidian will make them see, in the way they fear most silence." The lights in the room turned to soft blue. Everything was settled. Elena walked to the desk, picked up the cold cup of coffee, and smiled softly. Another day of Nova Sentinel. One person is silent. The whole system must speak. Outside in Arlington, the rain began to fall harder, pelting steadily against the glass roof like a clock ticking down. Because Elena knew when silent justice began to work, it needed no warning. As rain pounded steadily on the glass roof of Nova Sentinel Group's headquarters in Arlington, more than 200 miles away, the 47th floor of a silver glass building in Manhattan was in an uproar. The headquarters of Aurora Skyways, an airline that prides itself on unparalleled precision and class, was in a state of unprecedented chaos. The big screens in the control room flashed a series of red signals. Flights were being delayed. The dispatch system was not responding properly. Everything was silent but dangerous, as if an invisible hand was tightening the screws in a giant machine. In the middle of the room, Stephen Mallory, CEO of Aurora Skyways, stood tall at the console. His face was tense. "Someone explain to me what is going on." The CTO, a man with salt and pepper hair, turned back from the secondary control screen, his voice urgent. "Not a system error. Sir, not a glitch. This is precision throttle. Someone slowing the system down in a controlled manner." Stephen squinted. "Precision throttle. That means no damage, just throttle. Yes. It's like someone wanted our company to know they had the power to shut off the entire system, but still let it breathe." The room fell silent. A ping sounded from the security desk. The head of cybersecurity, Paul Hastings, looked up, his face pale. "Mr. Mallory, I have identified the source of the control signal." "Go ahead," Stephen said coldly. "It is Nova Sentinel Group." The words fell like a stone. A young employee dropped his coffee cup, spilling the liquid on the table. Stephen turned around, his eyes cold as steel. "Nova Sentinel. We're using their security platform." "Right. Yes, but root access is only available to them and—" Paul hesitated. "And who and Damon Cole. The air thickened. That name made everyone in the room look at each other. Stephen lowered his voice. Slowly, Damon Cole, you mean Damon Cole, the guy who designed the original framework for SentinelNet, yes, sir, that guy, where is he now? On flight AS921, sir, and, apparently, just got asked to leave his first-class seat by the crew. Stephen Mallory stood still. There was silence for a few seconds. Then he spoke softly, almost to himself. Oh my God, they just offended the wrong person. CTO looked up. You know him more than that. He's the guy who saved us from a system crash 2 years ago, when our entire network was hit by ransomware. Nobody knew, but Damon fixed it in 4 hours over a secure line. The room fell into a heavy silence. Stephen turned to the central screen. Each line of data appeared Flight AS921, status delay. Technical hold below was a small line of text. External supervision detected. Obsidian mode, active. He understood. Not a hack, not a threat. Just Damon was watching. And when someone like Damon Cole looks in, all the layers of gloss are stripped away. Stephen ran his hand over his face, his voice hoarse. Call Elena Brooks at Nova Sentinel. Immediately. No connection. Sir, their system is shut down. He looked at his watch. 8:42 a.m. An image of a black man, well-dressed, with calm eyes and a rare smile appeared in his mind. He remembered the first time he met Damon at the contract signing in 2019. Damon didn't say much, just one sentence as he left the room. Technology is only fair when people know how to use it properly, and now that saying echoes like an ignored warning. Paul, the head of security, spoke up, sir, if he wanted to. It would take just a few minutes for the entire booking, payment, and flight data systems to crash. But he didn't. No, Damon never does anything unnecessary, Stephen said, his voice low. He didn't sabotage it. He just let me see my own mistakes. CTO nodded. Eyes still tense. I guess Protocol Obsidian is running in observation mode. He's capturing logs, recording all cabin and crew comm data. And if I'm right, everything we're saying here is being mirrored as well. Stephen was silent for a long time. Then he turned to the group of engineers. No one touches the system. No resets, no reboots, just monitoring. He walked to the window and looked out at Manhattan, shrouded in a thin mist. The streets, the buildings, the people all like tiny veins in a vast system, and he knew Damon had just touched its heart. A PR manager ran in, his voice urgent. Mallory. Social media has started to see video from first class on AS921. A passenger posted a clip of Victoria Harland asking a black man to get down to economy. The clip is going viral. Stephen turned back, his eyes colder than ever. Victoria Harland. Yep, sir. She was a VIP passenger. She is no more. Call the legal team immediately. Prepare an internal audit statement and a public apology. PR hesitated. But if we go public, we'll have to admit our mistakes. We have no choice. When Nova Sentinel watches, the whole world will watch. I don't want their justice to turn into our sentence. He paused, his voice slow, almost to himself. He didn't hack the system. He just turned on the mirror we try to avoid looking into. The room was silent. Outside, the morning light reflected off the glass, splitting Stephen's face in two, one still of authority, one shadowed by fear, and somewhere else, on the jet bridge of Liberty Airport. Damon Cole sat still, not speaking, not moving, but every layer of power in Manhattan was shaking with that silence. That morning, America woke up to a video less than 30 seconds long. A shaky clip. A woman's shrill voice echoed through first class. "You should try coach. This seat is broken. You should go down to economy." And then there's the image of a black man, neatly dressed, unresponsive, just silently nodding, then leaving the plane. The clip was posted on Twitter with the caption, "Black Tech CEO removed from his own first-class seat." The poster was an anonymous passenger, but within 2 hours, the clip had more than 3 million views. Hashtags started to spread like wildfire. Seat Justice, Jacques AS921, darn fly fair major news outlets like CNN, NBC, The Atlantic, and Bloomberg all shared the story. Each adding their own perspective, but all asking the same question: can an airline be so bold as to fire the person who designed its own security platform? When that question was asked, the media storm could not be stopped. In Arlington, Elena Brooks watched the news spread across the screens of the Nova Sentinel. Each hashtag lit up on the interactive map, like thousands of fireballs blazing across America. She whispered to Damon through a secure earpiece, "It started. But you didn't do anything, did you?" Damon replied calmly. "No, I just let the truth take its course." She smiled slightly, a smile without joy, only acceptance. The truth sometimes doesn't need anyone to push it. It just needs someone to clear the way. Meanwhile, at Aurora Skyways, Manhattan headquarters, the media firestorm was building. Every minute, thousands of posts and hundreds of criticisms were directed at CEO Stephen Mallory. An economic news channel headlined "Aurora Skyways facing corporate meltdown after racial discrimination on flight AS921. Another newspaper wrote "Protocol Obsidian, the silent justice of the man Aurora should have respected." And in the comment corner, people were talking, if Damon Cole was the one designing their system, then the fact that the company was slow was probably no coincidence. He wasn't hacking, he was teaching them a lesson about how justice really works. Aurora Skyways shares fell 9% in the afternoon alone. The PR department was overloaded. The customer service line was jammed. Flight after flight started to report delays. Not only AS921, but at least 12 other Aurora flights also had data synchronization errors. The Nova Sentinel did nothing, just watched. But Damon's technological heartbeat reduction caused Aurora's entire network to slow down strangely. No one spoke of it, but in tech circles, people began calling it the Obsidian effect, the effect of justice when intelligence chooses to reflect rather than react. In New York, Victoria Harlan still hadn't figured out what was going on. She only realized something was wrong when her phone started vibrating. When she turned it on, dozens of messages and notifications popped up. "Victoria, you're on social media. Check the news. You've been canceled. What did you say to that man?" She turned on the video, and over the cacophony of the cabin, her own voice rang out, cold, condescending, undeniable. "You should try coach." She clicked it off and slumped in her chair, a chill running down her spine. She remembered Damon's eyes, not angry, not blaming, just silent. It was that silence, now, that spoke louder than any accusation. At Nova Sentinel, Elena looked at the social media map before her. The hashtag was spreading across states, from New York to Chicago to Los Angeles. A young engineer turned to her and asked, "Mrs. Brooks, should we intervene and calm the situation for them?" Elena replied slowly, "No. Obsidian does not punish. It only shows people the true face of the system they are protecting." A moment of silence. Then she added, Sometimes the only way to change perceptions is to expose them to their own image. Worldwide. Back at Liberty International, Damon was still sitting in the waiting area. The ground staff approached, his voice soft. "Mr. Cole, the airline has just apologized and asked you to return to first class." He just smiled. "No need. I think they need that seat more than I do." He stood up, his cold coffee cup in hand, and walked slowly down the long hallway. Each step seemed to match the rhythm of the news going around. Each tweet, each comment, each passing glance. A young employee at the airport recognized him and ran over. "Mr. Cole, I just wanted to say thank you. Many of us know what that feels like." Damon looked at him, nodding slightly. "Don't thank me. Just remember, not everyone who's silent is weak. Some people are just waiting for the system to tell the truth." The clerk was silent. When Damon was gone, he realized there were lessons that needed no teaching, just an action quiet enough to make the world stop and watch. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, CEO Stephen Mallory looked up at the news screen, where the headline read, "Aurora Skyways facing global backlash after racial incident involving tech visionary Damon Cole. Justice, he knew, would not knock this time with a hammer, but with a technical touch, cold, precise, and utterly silent." On Aurora Skyways AS921, as the clock ticked to 9:25 a.m., the atmosphere in first class began to change. The curious, indifferent looks gradually turned serious and cold. Someone had just watched the news on their phone, the clip of "You Should Try." Coach was playing on every social media channel, and the woman in the clip was Victoria Harland, sitting in row 2A. She sensed something was different. The backseat murmurs, the furtive raising of phones, the gazes of the passengers no longer admiring or indifferent. They were like those of a jury silent, but already rendered a verdict. Victoria tried to regain her composure. She adjusted her collar, smiled faintly, and said to the chief flight attendant, Chloe Ramirez, her voice still authoritative, "I don't care what they say. I'm asking the airline to ban that man from flying on any Aurora flights. This is harassment of a high-class passenger." Chloe stood up straight, her hands gripping the clipboard, her eyes wavering between respect and fear. "Mrs. Harland, I think we should calm down. The matter is being handled by the agency." "Deal," Victoria sneered. "Don't you understand? He's slowing down the whole airline. Look, the system isn't working. The plane isn't taking off, and you dare tell me to calm down." Her voice, already sharp, was tinged with panic. A few passengers turned around, some shaking their heads, some turning their seats to look straight ahead. From the third row, a middle-aged man with silver hair spoke, "Ma'am, we all saw the video. It wasn't the company. It wasn't the system. You started it." Victoria turned around. "Who are you to dare?" But the sentence was interrupted by another woman's voice, soft but clear. "We just saw. That piece of paper wasn't from the company. Who would write 'out of service' by hand and stick it on a chair?" Murmurs spread throughout the cabin. Another passenger nodded. I sat right behind her. I saw her post that note since boarding. The atmosphere changed completely. Chloe and Purser Anders Lee glanced at each other, sensing that the cabin had changed sides. Victoria, who had been the flight attendant's priority, was now the center of suspicion. Chloe tried to keep her voice professional. "Harland, let me contact cockpit. Maybe the airline can give you instructions on how to handle it." Victoria looked around, her eyes gradually becoming unsteady. Are you on his side?" Chloe didn't answer. She just tilted her head slightly, her gaze soft but firm. "I only stand for the truth, ma'am." A short sentence, but like a sharp knife cutting through the curtain of privilege. Victoria turned away, trying to appear calm, but her hands were shaking. She opened her phone, looked for messages from the airline. Nothing. Then she opened social media, and what she saw made her heart sink. Thousands of comments, hundreds of articles, hashtags saw flyfair, seat justice, and her image, cropped from the video, everywhere. The woman in the video is Victoria Harland, of the famous Harland banking family, a person born into privilege. Thinking first class was her right, a handwritten note, and a valuable lesson. Victoria felt the air around her become stuffy. A young passenger, who appeared to be a journalist, bent down to pick up the out-of-service sheet that had fallen to the floor. He held it up. The company's paper doesn't use blue ink, and no one writes seat reassignment by hand. The cabin was silent. The engine still hadn't started. Chloe gently gathered the paper and put it in her cabin file bag. Her voice, even Mrs. Harland, "Perhaps the airline will need to work with you after this flight." Victoria looked around. All eyes were on her. No longer with awe or admiration. They were the eyes of people who had just witnessed a mask fall. She tried to keep her voice. I just don't want to sit next to," but the sentence was left unfinished. No one asked next to who. No one needed to hear the rest, because the whole compartment understood. An elderly woman in the last row spoke up, softly but clearly. "Daughter, sometimes you don't need to shout at someone to show your contempt. Just a piece of paper, a look, is enough to let the whole world see that you think you are better than others." Victoria turned away, tears welling in her eyes despite her efforts to hold them back. The chatter in the compartment had stopped. They were just sitting there in silence, and in that silence there was both judgment and regret. Anders stepped back and whispered to Chloe. "The company just sent out a notice. Damon Cole is our security platform provider. He was the one who Miss Harland fired from his position." Chloe nodded. She said nothing more. She could only sense a new atmosphere in the cabin, the atmosphere of realization. Of the realization that one had witnessed something wrong right before one's eyes and no one had spoken up in time. Victoria sat motionless, her hands clasped together, looking out the window. Outside, the morning light shone through the glass, reflecting off her face, still beautiful, still proud, but now the image of someone who saw herself in the mirror, unable to deny it. No need for Damon to come back, no need for threats, just for the truth to be spread, and this time justice will come not with force or shouts, but with the look of a whole room. As they understand, discrimination doesn't always come in loud voices. Sometimes it comes in the form of a handwritten note, but the consequences resound like thunder. The thunder wasn't coming from far away. It was coming from the first-class cabin of Aurora Skyways Flight AS921, where the air was now thick with tension. Everyone on board had seen the clip, read the news, and knew that the man kicked out of first-class Damon Cole wasn't just some random passenger. He was the CEO of Nova Sentinel Group, the company that operates Aurora Skyways' digital security system. And when the cabin door opened again, every breath in the cabin seemed to stop. Damon Cole appeared. No bodyguards, no fuss, just him, in his black coat, walking slowly but surely. The light reflecting off the floor hit his face calm, no longer angry, no longer showing any intention of retaliation. Flight attendant Chloe Ramirez stood up straight and walked over with Purser Anders Lee. They both bowed slightly, their eyes respectful, as if an unspoken apology. "Welcome back, Mr. Cole," Chloe said softly. "We've confirmed your seat. 2B. Still yours." Damon nodded, his smile fleeting like a flash. He walked to his seat. The whole compartment was dead silent. No one dared to move. No one said a word. His footsteps were the only sound, steady, slow, but heavy as the tapping of conscience. When Damon stopped in front of seat 2B, Victoria Harland looked up. She tried to keep her composure, but her face was pale, her eyes red with shame and panic. On her phone screen, the message had just been updated. Aurora Skyways formally apologizes to CEO Damon Cole for the discriminatory incident on flight AS921. She looked at him, then around. No one could save her from that gaze. No flight attendant spoke. No one in the cabin took her side anymore. Damon put his hands on the back of the chair, his voice low and soft, but each word was clear. "This is my seat. I'm taking it now." The statement was not loud, not sharp, not cold. It was just true, an undeniable truth. Victoria opened her mouth to say something, maybe an excuse, maybe a plea, but her throat closed. All her reasons, all her confidence, all her so-called privileges suddenly became meaningless before the man who stood straight, calmly reclaiming his rightful place. Chloe spoke softly, her voice soft but firm as, "Harland, your seat is 2A. Please settle down so the flight can continue." Victoria stood up, staggering, sideways. Damon didn't look at her. He just pulled out a chair and sat down, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The cabin remained silent. No one dared speak, but everyone knew they had just witnessed a moment of true justice, a justice that needed no police, no court, no shouting, just the revelation of one's true identity, and everything fell into place. Chloe bowed. "Mr. Cole, the crew apologizes for the inconvenience." Damon simply said, "It's okay. The system learned its lesson. We can fly now." He turned to the window. Outside, the sun was rising, casting its rays on the still frosted wings of the plane. It was a strangely peaceful sight, like his mood. Anders signaled the cabin crew to close the door. As it closed, the engine started. The whole plane shook slightly. In the back seat, a passenger quietly pulled out his phone and started recording. Not to post, but to keep. Because sometimes people want to capture the rare moment when justice walks with calm feet. Meanwhile, Victoria Harland sat still, her eyes blank. Each click of the seatbelt echoed in her ears, each sound a fragment of reality she could not escape. A few hours earlier, she had been the one controlling first class with her eyes. Now, she was just a silent passenger, trying to hide behind her sunglasses, hoping the world would forget her face. Damon leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, not to rest, but to calm his mind, after a chain reaction he never intended to create. Elena Brooks sent a brief message over a secure channel protocol. Obsidian enters monitoring mode. "All systems are stable. Do you want to cancel the squeeze?" He typed back. "Stay in monitoring mode. Aurora will repair itself. We don't need to intervene." He put away his phone. His eyes glanced to the side where Victoria was sitting with her head down, her hands clenched. No hatred, no contempt, just silence. The silence of someone who understands that victory does not lie in humiliating someone, but in letting them see for themselves what they have lost. the plane began to taxi. Chloe announced over the loudspeaker, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for takeoff. Please remain seated and fasten your seat belts." Her voice didn't tremble, but there was something else. A respect, a belief that this moment would be recalled in aviation as a moral lesson. The morning light poured into the cabin from outside the window, reflecting off Damon's face. It made those around him suddenly realize he was more than just a CEO, a man of power. He was the image of something rare in the modern world, calm dignity in the storm of injustice. The plane took off. No one spoke, but in that silence, justice was served without a shout, just with a simple sentence. "This is my seat. I'm taking it now." And in the bright sunshine above the clouds, everyone understood. There are battles that can be won just by sitting down. Hundreds of miles down the road, Aurora Skyways headquarters were far from quiet. The 38th floor conference room, a symbol of the airline's power, was filled with the sounds no one wanted to hear: arguments, blame, and fear. On the central display, red text flashed: "System access, Obsidian mode, active, supervision enabled." Below, the Nova Sentinel Group logo rotates slowly, coldly, and silently, like an all-seeing eye. Stephen Mallory, CEO of Aurora, sat in the middle of the table. His tie was loose, his eyes were dark. Next to him was Joan Reynolds, chairman of the board, a woman with a voice strong enough to silence a room with a single sentence. "Stephen," she said slowly, clearly, "you told me this was a technical problem, but I saw the entire booking, dispatch, and logistics network deliberately bottlenecked. And now millions of passengers know why." Stephen took a breath, keeping his voice calm. "We are negotiating. I have contacted Nova Sentinel." Another voice rang out. Paul Hastings, head of security, tired but determined. "They're not negotiating, sir. They're observing. And they won't remove Obsidian until we publicly apologize to Mr. Damon Cole." "Excuse me," a marketing executive jumped up. "Apologizing would be admitting that our airline is racist in first class." "Do you know what the press would do about that?" Joan interrupted with a cold, steely gaze. "You're right. But if we don't apologize, our entire network will be under permanent surveillance. And worse, public trust will never return." Stephen was silent. He understood. For an airline, trust is fuel, and once it is gone, no technology can fly. On the screen beside her, Elena Brooks appeared via encrypted transmission. Behind her was the Nova Sentinel Operations Center, the cold light of dozens of screens reflecting off her face. "Hello, Mr. Mallory. I represent Nova Sentinel. I believe you understand why Obsidian was activated." Her voice was even, not threatening at all, but had the weight of someone holding the life and death switch of the entire system. Stephen nodded. "I understand. Damon Cole is not asking us to apologize to him personally. He just wants transparency." "I accept that," Elena replied, keeping her face neutral. "Good. Then I'll need an official statement from the company. Not in legal terms, but in human terms. When the company sends that signal, Obsidian will switch from tightening to monitoring. And then, just keep your word." Joan signaled for the legal team to get ready. But before leaving the room, she stopped and looked straight at Stephen. "I know you pride yourself on Aurora being the epitome of sophistication. But perhaps today is the day we learn that sophistication isn't about leather seats or wine. It's about how we treat others." The statement made the room fall silent. 3 hours later, Aurora Skyways' official statement was released across all platforms. The first part still had the familiar corporate tone. "We apologize for the inconvenience." But the last paragraph made the world pause for a few seconds as it read, "We, Aurora Skyways, publicly apologize to Mr. Damon Cole, not just for Seat 2B, but for all those who have been misjudged simply because they are not like the rest of the first-class cabin. Technology should not be used to protect privilege, but to ensure fairness. From today, we are committed to transparency, retraining our entire senior service team, and partnering with Nova Sentinel Group on the Equity in the Air program. Justice needs no noise, it just needs to be seen." The announcement spread within minutes. Elena watched it appear on the central screen, nodding slightly. She typed a short command: Obsidian mode transition, supervision, throttling released. Immediately, the Aurora system came back online. Delayed flights began departing, and cabin data synchronized normally. At the Nova Sentinel office, a young employee asked, "We lifted the order. Why are you still keeping the surveillance mode?" Elena replied, her eyes distant, "Because justice does not come just once. It needs to be maintained. They need to know that the eyes of truth are still watching." Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin of flight AS921, Chloe Ramirez received an announcement from the cockpit. She smiled slightly as she looked at Damon Cole, who was still sitting in seat 2B. She walked over and bowed her head slightly. "Cole, the system is stable. We'll be taking off in 5 minutes." Damon looked up, his eyes gentle but deep. "Thank you." "Chloe, I know your job today isn't easy. I'm just doing the right thing," she replied. "And that's the rarest thing these days." The plane began to move. The sunset light poured in from the windows, bathing Damon's face in a warm orange. He closed his eyes, not thinking about the words, the papers, or the media storm outside, because he knew he had won nothing. Only justice, this time, had its place. The world was no longer as silent as Flight AS921. The aftershocks rippled through phone screens, morning newscasts, and coffee cups in every conference room. People were talking not just about an aviation incident, but about a system of beliefs where privilege was assumed, and human dignity was tested by the gaze. On major television channels, the image of Victoria Harland appeared constantly, no longer in the golden light of success, but in the cold gray tones of collapse. Sensational headlines dominated the newspapers. Heir to the Harland banking empire faces backlash for first-class incident. From luxury to lesson. The woman who misjudged the man behind the system. Social media was relentless. The hashtag #OneSeatJustice was still rife, but now accompanied by calls, "Not just Victoria. How many people have thought like her?" The distinction isn't in the words, but in the look in your eyes when you think someone doesn't belong here. Former employees of the chain of high-end restaurants and hotels that Victoria invested in have also begun to speak out. One wrote, she once said, "Luxury is a space for people to know who they are." Perhaps she forgot that dignity is not in the plane ticket. The world witnessed a deconstruction of privilege, and the irony was that it was not an activist who initiated it, but a man who chose to remain silent. Meanwhile, Damon Cole, the center of the storm, has not appeared on any talk shows. He has refused all interview requests, posted no posts on social media, commented no comments, and retaliated no. A reporter once ambushed him in the lobby of the Nova Sentinel. Damon just smiled and said softly, I have nothing more to say. Everything that needs to be understood, everyone has seen." He walked away, unguarded, without explanation, and it was that silence that made him the center of respect. A columnist for The Atlantic writes Damon Cole didn't give interviews, didn't call for a boycott, but simply by standing up and then returning to his chair, he taught the world the difference between reaction and protest. At Aurora Skyways, the following days were a series of tense meetings, but one of real change. President Joan Reynolds announced the new program Aurora Skyways will be rolling out a passenger equity training program for all cabin crew, particularly in business and first-class cabins. We cannot buy back trust. We must relearn how to earn it. They added a policy called Bias Alert Protocol, which allows passengers to report discriminatory behavior directly through an internal system that Nova Sentinel supports. Stephen Mallory, in his first post-crisis press conference, spoke in a low, slow voice, no longer the shadow of a proud CEO. "We used to think that technology helps us manage people better, but this incident teaches us that sometimes it is people who need to be upgraded, and we will start with ourselves, outside." It's known as the 2B reform, a reform that started with an empty chair and a handwritten note. In the airline industry, other airlines are taking notice. Delta, United. Emirates all held internal sessions titled Case Study Aurora AS921, Discrimination in Premium Cabins. HR executives revisited their hiring processes and reevaluated the concept of premium service. One person at the American Airlines meeting said, "We still serve champagne, but perhaps we have forgotten to serve respect." And so, a quiet shift began, not in technology, but in perception. At a small cafe near the Potomac River, Damon Cole sat with Elena Brooks, his silent companion throughout the whole affair. Elena smiled, putting down her cup of coffee. "You know, the whole industry's calling you the icon of quiet justice." Damon chuckled. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just don't want anyone else to sit and look at a handwritten piece of paper and feel small." Elena looked at him and nodded. But sometimes, it's the people who don't want to be icons who become icons in the true sense. The wind blew across the river, ruffling a few pages of newspaper lying on a nearby table. On the front page, a photo of Damon sitting in cabin 2B. The light angled across his face was captioned, "The man who sat still and changed the air." Victoria Harland was different. She withdrew from the public eye, canceled all events, temporarily left her position in the family corporation. But in a short interview a few months later, she appeared. No makeup, no designer clothes. Her voice was hoarse, slow, sincere. "I used to think people were born knowing where they belonged. Now I understand. We only belong when we respect the people who walk with us." The interview wasn't shared much, but for those who watched it, they saw something rare and awakening. The story of Flight AS921 is no longer about an airline or a first-class passenger. It has become a metaphor for our times where power can change, but character cannot be faked, where one man chose silence over anger, and by his silence, he made the world listen. A year after Aurora Skyways flight, AS921, the world changed not in a loud revolution, but in quiet changes in every classroom, every boardroom, every internal training session. People gave the event a new name, concise but powerful. The Obsidian Incident, a handwritten note, a seemingly small act, revealed a system of power that was accustomed to not taking responsibility. At Harvard Business School, Thursday afternoon class is no longer about strategy or finance. Instead, students are reviewing a short clip of Flight AS921 the moment Damon Cole quietly returns to his seat and says, "This is my seat. I'm taking it now." Professor Ellen Kramer, who teaches corporate ethics, paused the video at that frame. She asked, "Who here thinks he won?" No one raised their hand. A student at the back of the class whispered, "He didn't win. He just made the whole system realize it lost." The whole class was silent. Professor Kramer smiled and turned off the screen. That is the nature of real power. It needs no justification. It just needs to exist. On the other side of the country, at Columbia Law School, the Social Law Department offers a seminar entitled The Obsidian Doctrine: When Technology Becomes Moral Architecture. Law students discuss Protocol Obsidian, a mechanism for ethical oversight in digital systems. One student asks if technology can force companies to change themselves. Is that artificial justice or real justice? Professor Marcus Hill, a civil rights expert, replied slowly, "If humans don't correct themselves, technology, created by humans, will remind them, and it's still justice, just colder." At Nova Sentinel Group, where Damon Cole and Elena Brooks still work together every day, a new sign has been added to the hallway. On it is the logo of the Obsidian Foundation, which supports cases of discrimination in the luxury service industry. Elena was the one who initiated it, but Damon was the one who named it. He explained in a small meeting of the founding group, Obsidian is an igneous rock, formed by violent impact. But when it cools, it reflects like a mirror. I want this fund to be like that. Not impulsive, not punitive, just reflecting the truth so people can see themselves. The fund is not just for legal aid. They provide psychological support for victims, awareness training for businesses, and build algorithms to detect bias in services. At the fund's launch press conference, Damon said just a few words. "I don't want anyone to have to activate a protocol like Obsidian again. But if it does happen, at least now they'll know there's someone watching them. No noise, no slogans, no tears. Just a calmness that silenced the entire room." The media continued to follow the story, but the tone changed. Damon was no longer called a victim. They called him a man redefining justice in the data age. Wired magazine published an analysis. The Obsidian incident is not just a case of discrimination in first class. It marks a shift from human morality to systemic morality. When humans make mistakes, technology remembers. When systems make mistakes, technology reflects. And if companies don't correct themselves, technology will force them to correct. The post went viral so quickly that a week later, many large corporations, from banks, hotels, to other airlines, began signing partnerships with Nova Sentinel to implement the Sentinel Equity Framework, a set of technology rules that ensure fairness in customer service. One autumn morning, Damon sat in his 41st floor office, looking out through the glass windows at the city skyline. The buildings reflected a soft yellow in the soft sunlight. Elena walked in, newspaper in hand. "See," she said, pointing to the front page, "Harvard, Columbia, Stanford. They all have the Obsidian incident on their official curriculum." Damon chuckled. "I just want students to understand that justice is not an outcome. It is an action. The action of choosing to be right when no one is forcing us to be right. Elena nodded, and they will learn that. Not from the system, but from how you chose to stay silent that day. A comfortable silence fell over the room. Outside, the wind blew through the glass, carrying with it the distant sound of planes taking off. Damon looked up, his smile slightly sad. "You know," Elena continued, "in Aurora's internal report, it was noted that the out-of-service paper was still kept, sealed in the training room. They called it the lesson tag." Damon was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Good. Sometimes, the things that embarrass us the most are the most valuable lessons." 1 year, 1 flight, 1 handwritten note, and now a movement. From first class in the sky, to lecture halls, to boardrooms. People are beginning to speak a new language about justice, the language of mindfulness. And at the center of that wave, Damon Cole remained the same as the first day he stepped into to be calm, humble, and silent. Because sometimes silence isn't a sign of weakness. It's the strongest way to make the world listen. 2 years after Aurora Skyways flight AS921, its name is still mentioned in classrooms, conferences, and conversations about social ethics. But for Damon Cole, it's all just a memory contained in a digital file, simple, clean, unemotional. He never saw it as a victory. For him, it was simply a moment when the world was illuminated by truth, and technology was the mirror. That day, Damon was invited to Geneva, where the global conference on corporate justice and digital equality was taking place. Hundreds of corporate leaders, academics, and activists were present. It was well known that Damon was not a talkative person, so when he accepted, there was a lot of curiosity. The convention center's grand hall reflected the golden light from the classic chandeliers. The giant screen behind the stage projected white text on a black background, "The age of no more silence. The age of no more silence." When Damon stepped onto the podium, the room fell silent. He held no notes, no slides, just a microphone and a gaze directed at the audience. "I'm not a politician. I'm not an inspiration," Damon began, his voice low and even, the timbre of someone who has weathered many storms. "I'm just a passenger on flight AS921, where a handwritten note caused the entire system to examine itself." Some people smiled, some nodded. He continued, "I learned something simple sometimes. Justice doesn't need shouting. It just needs data, because data is unbiased. It doesn't care about skin color or ethnicity. It just reflects what it sees." He paused for a moment. The lights dimmed, leaving only a single frame of light around him. "But don't misunderstand. I don't believe technology has a soul. Humans do. And it's that soul that determines whether technology is a weapon or a mirror." That statement brought complete silence to the room. Then Damon smiled slightly. "Just enough to break the solemn atmosphere I just want the day when no one has to create another protocol obsidian. Because then the world will know how to fix itself." He bowed briefly, then stepped down. The applause rang out, not loud, but steady. Steady, like the heartbeat of a society gradually awakening. After the speech, Elena Brooks caught up with him in the back hallway. She handed him a small envelope, not an invitation, but an old photo printed from the Nova Sentinel archives. The photo shows Flight AS921 that night. Taken from an airport surveillance camera, the cabin is dimly lit. The door is closed. Damon is sitting still in seat 2B, his head slightly tilted towards the window. "We're keeping this for our records, but I think you should have it," Elena said. "You know, that flight took off 47 minutes late. But when it left the runway, everyone on board stood up and applauded. No one said it, but they knew they were flying in a new order." Damon looked at the photo for a long time, then folded it. "Maybe. That's when true justice takes flight," he replied softly. Elena smiled, and maybe that's why, despite being late, it still got where it needed to go. Outside, a light rain was falling in Geneva. Damon stepped out of the lobby and looked out at the stream of people hurrying through the streets, all holding phones devices filled with the technology he had created, but which he rarely called power. He just saw them as an extension of himself, capable of hurting, capable of healing. He smiled, pulled out of his pocket a metal card with small letters engraved on it, Protocol Obsidian. In silence, we see. It was an internal card that only 5 people in Nova Sentinel possessed. He turned it over to the back, where Elena had hand-engraved the following: "Justice doesn't shout, it stands. Justice doesn't shout, it stands." Damon put the card back, then walked slowly through the rain. Airline. The story of Flight AS921 is no longer his alone. It is a reminder to the world that the era of suffering and silence is over. Now, when someone is excluded from a seat because of their skin color, gender, or background, they are no longer alone. A phone call, a tweet, a video, all of it can make the entire system stop, look in the mirror, and ask, who are we in that moment? Technology has changed the world, but it is the people who dare to keep their dignity in silence that make it humane. And if someone asked Damon Cole if he had any regrets, the answer would probably still be no. I only regret that I could not help the world realize sooner that justice can also speak in a small voice, somewhere in the sky. Aurora Skyways, AS921 continues to take off. In memories, in lessons, in every little decision in the office or cabin, it departs late, very late, but in the end, it still flies, in the right direction, with the right people, in the right place. Damon Cole's story isn't just a lesson about racism or power. It's a reminder that in today's noisy world, true power lies not in how loud we speak, but in how we choose to respond to injustice. Damon didn't yell, didn't argue. He just stood there quietly, letting the truth work its way through the system he'd created. And 4 minutes later, an entire airline was bowing its head. There will be times in life when you are looked down upon, judged by your appearance, your status, or the color of your skin. But remember, no one can take your dignity away from you unless you lose it through anger. Like Damon, sometimes, all it takes is a calm step back to make the world slow down and see you more clearly. Keep your wits when insulted, your dignity when scorned for, then you're teaching the world silent justice. Thank you for watching the story to the end. If you believe that justice can be silent but never weak, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to join us in spreading stories about morality, awareness, and dignity in the new era.